Now, the parasitic nature of the Nephilim host is what you described. What you were describing to me, DC. A lot of the politicians in DC are either visibly fitting the characteristics that you were laying out, or there's a lot of assumptions about certain people in DC that fit those characteristics. And we are seeing the push of the normalization of pedophilia in our culture and society. And unfortunately, we have this whole story of Jeffrey Epstein that just keeps getting buried more and more. In fact, just recently, there was a broadcast. I forget what one of these major news outlets, but probably not. It was probably Fox. If it was a major news outlet, it had to be Fox because it wasn't going to be anybody else. But it was Jesse Waters on Fox. He was talking about this and how they keep suppressing this Epstein story. And the fact is, in these court documents, there's evidence that he blackmailed powerful people. And the only person that is being called on the carpet is the one that's in jail right now, Ghislaine Maxwell. And there's so many of these other people roaming free. The only thing that I can imagine is because at the highest levels, there is guilt and they will cover each other's tracks. And what you're saying is this is all related to this Nephilim agenda.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kind of going back to what you mentioned earlier about a virus of the mind. Is that how you put it? Or a mind virus?
Yeah.
I think you are way more accurate than you probably even understood. So I want to talk a little bit about that because this is a way that the Nephilim agenda impacts us here and now. And so, thanks to this, there's this growing field called neuroparasitology, which essentially examines the impact that parasites have on our central nervous system. And so we now know that parasites can alter the behavior of their host to the point where they literally can hijack the host's decision-making process. So parasites, these biological parasites, are masters of chemical and biological warfare. What they do is they specialize in mind control and molecular mimicry. And so you have these parasites that can actually influence a person on the level of their DNA all the way up to the level of social interaction. And so what happens is these parasites actually can disrupt the host's perception of reality and then move in to control behavior. So I want to give some examples to this because this is what you were touching on with a mind virus. So there's a particular parasite called Toxoplasma gondii, and I'll just call it T-Gondii for short. And essentially it's found in cat feces and also in undercooked meat. And so it's estimated about 30% of the world's population is infected with T-Gondii. And here in the United States, probably between 10 to 20% of the population is infected with T-Gondii. Now, it's a parasite that can lay dormant inside of us, but when it gets activated, and we don't know how it gets activated necessarily, but it prefers to feed on lymph nodes, brain, heart, and lungs. And what it does is it actually manipulates behavior through using an epigenetic process that alters the genes of the amygdala. And this is where it becomes just absolutely fascinating. So what happens is stimuli that normally would trigger fear in a person actually triggers sexual arousal instead. And so you have this fatal attraction phenomenon. So hosts of this T-Gondii are less risk aversive. So I'll give you some examples because we see this in insects, in animals, and also in humans. So in mice, for example, mice normally are, afraid of cats, and the smell of cat urine would trigger a fear response and they'd run the other direction. But mice infected with T-Gondii are actually sexually aroused by the smell of cat urine and go towards the cat, not having that normal fear response. And of course, then they're killed because the cat gets them. Well, in humans, what happens is risky situations that would normally trigger fear in an infected human, that's perceived as kind of a benign situation. So for example, if you're in the middle of gunfire, you have no fear response to that, or walking across a busy street with oncoming traffic. There isn't the normal feared response. And then what they found, research has found that infected people will actually have an increased attraction to harmful sexual deviant practices. Give you some examples. This is where it begins to tie back into Nephilim hosts. So women infected with T-Gondii are more likely, there's a higher frequency of engaging in bestiality as compared to non-infected women. And again, that's one of the behavioral characteristics of the Nephilim host. Men that are infected with T-Gondii are more likely to engage in sexual practices that include bondage, rape, and other forms of violence. Again, these are characteristics of the Nephilim hosts. Another fascinating thing about T-Gondii is there's actually a correlation with some neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and then also with mental illness such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And what we're finding is that, people infected with T-Gondii actually have higher suicide rates as well. And so, if I were still practicing, seeing clients, doing therapy, I would actually have all of my clients do a parasite cleanse because I would want to know, okay, are there parasites that are driving this mental illness? Let's get rid of those parasites and see what gets cleared up. and then we can work with what's left. So I find that incredibly fascinating. And then there's some research by a guy named Kevin Lafferty out of University of California, Santa Barbara. And he looked at the population, so T-Gondii in a population, the impact that has on culture. And what he found is that populations with a higher prevalence of T-Gondii actually have higher levels of neuroticism. So what neuroticism is essentially, it's a personality trait disposition to where a person experiences kind of these negative affects. So like anger, anxiety, self-consciousness, irritability, depression, this overall emotional instability. And then he found that, these populations with higher prevalence of T-Gondii are more likely to establish authoritarian governments, which I find super fascinating.